Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Why Enterprises Need Mobile Communication, Auditing, and Archiving with Guava and Blackberry. Today we will cover the needs to archive electronic communications, including email, social media, instant messaging, and similar data, and how Guava and Blackberry can assist you in getting there. Additionally, today's webinar will highlight how Blackberry Audit and Archiving Service can help enterprises maintain oversight of their mobile communications for information governance, corporate protection, and regulation compliance. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. Q Mangus is the Director of Product Marketing at Guava. He will cover the key ways companies can audit and archive their mobile communication and outline the key features of Guava and take you through the product interface. We'll close off today's webinar with contact information for Guava and your Blackberry sales representative. If you have any questions throughout today's webinar, please post them via the chat window at the bottom left of your screen. We will address all questions at the end of today's webinar, so feel free to post them whenever you like throughout the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Q. Q, over to you.
Thanks, Carrie, and thanks everyone for being here and for your interest in this webinar. We're really excited to bring you some information on how you can, as Carrie said, be compliant with your mobile communications, and we'll kind of talk about all electronic communication as well. So what I wanted to begin with is just, as you can see here, a picture of a shredded document, right? Let me explain this a little bit here. The idea behind this is that the Blackberry Audit and Archiving Service, or what I'll refer to throughout this presentation as BAS, this solution connects directly with the BES server. And so what happens is, as we all know, or especially those who are using BES, that BES logs information. It takes logs from the phones, but this information is not complete. Think of it like a shredded document. Imagine a person trying to take a shredded document, put those pieces back together. What is that going to look like? It's difficult to interpret, right? It's going to be something that's going to be hard to read what's in that shredded document. That's the whole point of shredding, right? So what happens with Blackberry Audit and Archiving Service, or BAS, is that it takes those logs and it delivers them in a complete format, in a way that is in context, that's usable, viewable, and searchable. And that's the idea here behind BAS. Is to take what you've already invested in BES and to take those logs and to deliver them in a format that you can use. And we'll go into more about how you can use that format and also some other things apart from just the BES logs that BAS can do. So let's go a little deeper into what Blackberry Audit and Archiving Service is. What it does is it actually archives. We talked a little bit about the mobile and the BES logs, but it also archives other mobile. It archives, as you can see here on the screen there, it archives mobile communications for Android, of course for BlackBerry, and for iOS. It also archives email for different multiple email platforms, social media and instant messaging, and search. And what's great is that we like to call it a unified archive, because what happens is that BAS takes all of these electronic communications that you have in your organization and it archives them in a central archive. And this central archive is easily accessible by IT administrators and by other named users. So if you have outside teams like auditors, legal, that need to access these electronic communications, which they do, and we'll talk about why, BAS gives them the ability to access that and to perform certain functions that we'll go over today. But that's the idea behind this, is that you have electronic communications. You need to be able to archive them and have oversight and be able to audit them. And by having a central archive of all this electronic communication, you will be compliant and you can manage your information. So let's go and we'll talk a little deeper here. So once again, let's talk about the benefits of this solution. Let's go a little deeper into what exactly it captures. So it captures MMS and SMS text messages, BBM, PIN, phone call logs, And then it captures email messages and the attachments to those emails, appointments, tasks for multiple email systems, social media messages, instant message data, and web search data. And then what can you do with that data? As I talked a little bit before, you have a simple, easily accessible archive that can be accessed by named users. And then one other great thing is that end users can access their own personal archive. Then you have the ability to have litigation holds, and I'll show this a little bit later on. And then once again, you have that central archive that can be searched. You can perform e-discovery from that, and the e-discovery tools are actually built into the solution. So you don't have to worry about having another solution in place to be able to search that archive, to be able to perform those e-discovery tasks. Those are all included in that BAS archive. Let me talk about each different section of the BAS archive. So let's talk first, of course, about Blackberry. So BAS provides archiving for SMS, MMS, PIN, and text messages sent via Blackberry, phone call logs on a Blackberry, and these are all done via the BES system, the Blackberry Enterprise Service. So any of those messages, the BBM as well, phone call logs, text messages, those are all pushed through the BES system, as I talked about, right? It takes those logs and it delivers them in a good format that you can use. And then you've also got a newer solution with BBM Protected, which is a great option for all of us out there to be able to have those instant messaging communications using BBM in an encrypted and secure format. And of course, as we all know, and if you're not aware of this, BBM Protected is available, of course, for BlackBerry, Android, and iOS. And so, great solution to be able to have those communications, those instant messaging communications between BlackBerry, Android, and iOS. Have that, for your organization to be able to have secure communications, fully encrypted communication. And what's great is that it can also be archived using BAS. It'll tie directly to BBM Protected, and it will pull those messages down into the archive. So now, of course, you have one other thing that you can search. And, of course, what's great is that messages are archived in their original context, meaning that you can go back and see the message string. We use intelligent threading to be able to go back and see what conversation took place, the message between each user, so that you can really go back and see and get a complete view of what has happened. And then what's great as well with the solution is that new users are auto-provisioned, so you don't have to worry about what to do if you have new users coming on board. And to help ensure compliance and make sure that your archive is complete and fulfills the different regulations that are out there, data is completely controlled and locked down, meaning that your users can't alter, adjust, or delete incoming or outgoing messages or phone call usage data, because it's tied directly with the BES system, and BAS pulls that down. Now let's go and talk a little bit about the Android piece. So similar to BlackBerry, with Android archiving, the BlackBerry Auditing Archiving System archives SMS, MMS text messages and phone call logs. And now it's done a little differently than how it's done with BlackBerry, and that is that there's actually an app that goes on the Android device. And this app, what it does is it monitors those text messages and the phone call logs, and it takes that information and it routes it to the archive. So that is something that there is an app on the phone to take the information there. One great thing as well, as I talked before, BBM Protected on Android is also archived. And similarly, messages are archived in their original context using that threading. Now for iOS archiving, this is an interesting one. For those of you who are on this call that may have experience with iOS, with using iPhones, we know that they're pretty locked down. There isn't a lot of information that we can get to. And so we've actually done an interesting thing where there's an app that's provided on the iPhone, similar to what we're talking about with Android, except for this app kind of creates a separate persona on the iPhone. It creates a business persona. And what this business persona does is it gives you the ability to have a separate mobile business number for your employees that may be using iPhones so that they can call via this number, and that's all done through the app, and they can do encrypted text messaging via this app. And so what happens is as those messages are going across and they're encrypted, Blackberry Auditing and Archiving service will take those messages, it ties to that app, and will take those messages and will archive them as well. So you have those encrypted text messages, and the phone call logs are all archived into this one central archive. And then, of course, as I talked about before, you have the BBM protected on iOS. That is also archived. So kind of in a review of the mobile piece, before we talk about other things, just realize we understand that your employees are using their mobile devices. It may be something where they're bringing their own device and asking to be able to access your network. It may be a corporate issue device, but what we've tried to do and accomplish is give you that auditing and archiving and that oversight of what your employees are doing. Whether that's something that they bring on their own or something that you issue, you can have that assurance that you can go back and see what they have been communicating. You can easily search those messages. And then, of course, this gives you the ability to be compliant with different regulations. So, as we stated, the purpose of this webinar is why should you be doing this? Why you as an enterprise needs to have mobile auditing and archiving. And we're going to take it a step further, of course, and talk about all electronic communication. But I wanted to just sum that up here, that the reason why is, one, to be able to ensure that you're complying with regulations. And of course, if you're in a regulated industry like financial or government or healthcare, that's even more applicable. But of course, all organizations need to be doing this. The other reason why is to manage your data, to be able to have that oversight of what your employees are doing, and it provides valuable information for you. So those are your reasons to be compliant and, of course, to manage your data. So let's go on to a little bit more. We're going to take this a step further, like I said, and talk about other electronic communication. So let's talk quickly about the email archiving piece. This is essential for organizations as well, as they need to be able to archive email. And we know a lot of organizations are probably doing this, but this is something that's great in the way that we do it, meaning that you can have the mobile communications archived in the same central archive as with email. So BAS securely archives Exchange, Office 365, Gmail, and or GroupWise in one central interface. That's also with those mobile communication. And this archive can be deployed on-prem or in the cloud. And as we talked about before, you can allow administrators, record managers, or other authorized users to access the archive, and that's any piece of this archive. And when it comes to email specifically, the email messages are archived, attachments, appointments, tasks, and what's great is that the message structure and folder structure is replicated over. So when a user goes into their archive, it's going to look like an email inbox. So it'll look familiar to them. They can search and browse and do great things there. And we'll show a little bit more on that. But there's the email archiving piece that is part of the overall Blackberry Audit and Archive Service archive. Now, I'm going to touch on the social media monitoring, this is something that's, I want to hit this one because it's a little bit different than what we're doing with email and mobile, and that is that it's more than just archiving. So with the social media piece, BAS actively monitors, filters, and blocks social media, instant messaging, and web searches. So as your employees are accessing social media, say they're going on to the supported social media platforms of Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Yammer, if they go onto one of these, like let's say they go onto LinkedIn and they're going to post something on there, if it's something that violates company policy, let's say that you have a policy that they cannot be sharing confidential or sensitive information, there is the ability in BAS to be able to monitor that and set up rules so that if the post violates policy, it will be blocked. It will be stopped from ever being posted. And at the same time, it will be archived. So now you can allow your employees to access social media, which is a great thing. I mean, we know people are using social media at work, and it helps. It really is a good thing for your organization. Many people might think that it's bad, and there are risks with it. However, it is something that you should be allowing your employees to use. And the reason being is it increases collaboration, right? There's the ability, especially with an enterprise solution like Yammer, but there's the ability for your employees to easily communicate across the enterprise. There's the ability for them to contact your customers and potential clients and engage with them. And of course, with your corporate social media account, it has a way of getting your message out and in ways that we've never been able to do before. And so the idea here is to allow your employees to access social media, yet to have that oversight to be able to filter and monitor and prevent things from being posted that may be inappropriate, sensitive, in other words, things that you don't really want out there. And so that's the idea here. And similarly, with instant messaging, we do the same thing. So with AOL Instant Messenger, Google Hangouts, Link, and Yahoo Messenger, we would take those communications, it will filter them, it will monitor them, prevent things that are inappropriate from being posted, and then of course it will be archived. And it's archived in the same central archive with your mobile and email. And that archive can be searched once again, and the search results will come into one central location. And once again, we will be showing that in just a minute here. And then one last piece that I want to hit on here with the social media umbrella is the web search. So as employees are searching Wikipedia, Yahoo, Bing, Google, or YouTube, those searches, once again, as I talked about with social media, those searches are monitored, and they can be blocked and filtered. So if a person goes on and they're going to do a Google search as an example, and they are searching something that you don't want them to search, that can be blocked, and then that search will be archived as well. And of course, every search, every social media post, and every instant messaging post that is done on your network will be monitored and filtered, but they'll also be archived. And so even if the post is not filtered or blocked, that's archived. And if it is, it will also be archived as well. One other thing, too, about this is if you have employees that are working off the network, there's actually a workstation agent that can be deployed on Windows or Mac, and that agent will monitor, once again, those communications to do the same thing, and just on a per workstation basis. So if they're off of your network doing these things, that can also be done. And finally, there is a corporate social media access portal. So as to allow your employees to access your corporate social media account without having to give them the login credentials, what you do is you just create teams within the social media piece, and those teams will have access to your corporate social media account. So you would put the credentials in once into the portal, grant rights to the users to be able to access that, and then they can go to your social media accounts without ever having to log in or have those credentials. So now if you have employees that come and go, you don't have to worry about changing the credentials on your social media accounts. You can just be rest assured that that they won't have them, and you take them out of the system, they're no longer able to access your social media. And one final thing, I already said that. I know I said final already, but one other thing that I just remembered here that I wanted to touch on, because this is really important and a lot of people bring this up, is what to do when it comes to archiving and monitoring your corporate social media account. So there's two ways that we can do this, and two things that you want to remember is that, number one, for any type of social media account that you have, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Yammer, we can archive that, and you can go back and see what has happened with that corporate social media account. You just have to make sure that somebody in your organization accesses that, your social media account. And once they do, that will be pulled into the archive, and you can go back and have oversight of what's been going on and see what's been going on with your corporate social account. Now, with Facebook in particular, we have a Facebook app that allows you to monitor your Facebook account, your Facebook corporate account, and look and see what, or look and make sure that posts are not being put onto the wall that you don't want, that communications aren't happening that you don't want. You can actually proactively monitor your corporate social Facebook account. So wrapping up, once again, so we talked the mobile piece, we talked the email piece, and now here's the social media and instant messaging piece. This is all under the umbrella of the Blackberry Audit and Archive service. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the meat, and I'm going to be able to show you a few things on how this solution looks and how it will function. So let's start by looking at the end user interface. So here we have an example of mobile messages that an end user sees. Of course, it can be accessed via any web-enabled device. And for those of you who are using Outlook, there's also an Outlook plugin for them to be able to access the archive as well. Now, if they're particularly just using the mobile archiving, you would have this web access interface where they can go in and view, browse their messages, and end users have the ability to do certain things that you grant them. So an end user can go in and view their own archive. They can restore messages as needs be. So if something has been deleted, whether that's email or mobile or social media, you can go back and restore them back to the live system. They can print and do other things depending on what you would grant rights to. Now, for administrators or other named users, you have the ability to grant certain rights. So an administrator by default is going to have the ability to do litigation hold, and this can be done on a per message or a mailbox level. And so that's here the little lock icon that you see. That's to be able to place a litigation hold on any one of those messages. You can tag a message. You can forward a message. You can export them. And the export capability, you can export to a PDF, PST file, or to a standalone archive viewer or publisher. And I'll talk about what that is. But basically, it's a subset of the archive that can be given to an outside team. I'll show you that in just a moment. But what we've done here with the Blackberry Audit and Archive service is give you the ability to easily browse and search the entire archive. And you can perform e-discovery functions with those built-in tools. You can perform those litigation holds. You can do an e-discovery search. You can redact certain information and be prepared in case of litigation or regulatory audit. So once again, coming back to the reason why you should have audit and archiving of mobile and other communication. That's why, to be prepared. Be prepared in case of litigation and to be ensured that you're complying with the regulations and that you're managing your information. And this is how you do it, easily from this central archive. Let me show you an example of a search. So the screen we just saw was a browse. Here's an example of a search. So this particular user went through and they searched for any SMS, phone call logs, MMS, PIN, and BBM messages, and you can see that the results came across. So they did one search and got one set of search results for the entire set of messages that were archived. And then, of course, if they chose to, they could also have email messages phone messages, tasks, appointments, and notes that come across as well in the one central search. So I hope you can see the power here of being able to do one search and get all the results from one central archive. I mean, that's kind of key when it comes to what we've been talking about here. Having an archive or having data is great, but if you can't use it, if you can't get to it, what good does it do you? So you need to be able to quickly and easily access messages. And with the searching capability that's within BAS, you can easily and quickly get to those messages. And archive messages are indexed at near zero latency, so you can be assured that if you do a search, you're getting results from everything that's in that index, in that archive. Now, one piece that I wanted to show that's up and coming, so those of you who may have seen the Blackberry Auditing and Archiving service before, this is something that will be released shortly, and those of you who haven't, great. This applies to you as well. Is I showed you a little bit of the search. However, now with the improved search that will be coming shortly, there's the ability to have what we like to call a Google-like search, meaning that as you start to type into the search, it's going to start to populate suggestions of what's in the archive. So in this case, I start to type the name Colin, and it's going to bring back anything that pertains to Colin. It will start to fill that in and give you give you those results. So it's going to make the searches easier and be able to give your IT department, auditors, and other legal a quick and easy way to do that search and get those results quickly and easily. And then, of course, you have the ability to search in subject, sender, domain, attachments. You can do the different scope, and you can do a date range, different mailboxes. And those tags that I talked about before, those message tags, you can search those tags as well. So just know that when messages are placed into that archive, they're easily accessible, and you can go back and get to them quickly, which is essential, especially like we were talking about before, for regulated industries, because we know that, as an example, the Dodd-Frank Act, you need to be able to reproduce those messages within 72 hours of a request of an audit. So if you're involved in financial and the Dodd-Frank Act applies to you, you need to know that you need to quickly go back and get those messages, and with the retained search in the Blackberry Audit and Archive service, you can easily and quickly get to that. Now here's an example of the intelligent threading. As I talked to this a little bit, the Blackberry Audit and Archive service actually recreates and archives things in their message thread. So here's an example of some text messages that were going across between two people, and you were able to see those messages in their context. Let's just take, for example, that if you were to do a search and you just found this one that says, "Sounds great, when should we go?" You may not know what that's about. Or the one that says, "Let's do it." That could be anything, right? But when you can go back and see the message in its context, you can see what that conversation was, and easily and quickly see, what was being said and get the meaning behind it. And this intelligent threading applies to any of the SMS, MMS messages, BBM, or PIN discussions, and it also applies to social media and email as well. And this is done based on who is texting, time, and proximity. So once again, this is invaluable for internal or external auditors during litigation, e-discovery, or an open records request. Now let me touch a little bit on the publisher. So I talked about that the standalone archive viewer or publisher is a format that can be exported. So what's great is as you do those search results, you can export a subset of the archive into a standalone viewer or the publisher. And what's great is that the publisher, as I stated, is standalone, so it can be put onto a jump drive or a DVD or CD and passed along to an outside team, like say an e-discovery team or a legal team or auditors. And this publisher is fully indexed, and it can be searched, and you can perform redaction, and once again, it can be exported to PDF again. Let me show you a little bit more here. Here's an example of the publisher, and as you can see, that subset can be easily browsed and searched, and you can perform redaction on that. So the idea here is to allow, if you want to allow your users to access allow auditors, legal, other named users to access the archive. If you don't want them to have that, there is functionality in Blackberry Audit and Archive Service to be able to allow named users to access the entire archive. However, if you want to keep that separate and you want to allow outside teams to still be able to browse and do these e-discovery functions without having access to your entire archive, you can do so with the publisher. And then, of course, auditing is essential to what you're doing, and this is very important for those in regulated industries. However, it's also important for everybody to be able to go back and see what has been going on. So you can actually create a custom audit log showing all the activities of a particular user. So you'll be able to audit what a user has done. You know, as they go in and access their archive, you can see that. You can see if they've, exported a message, restored a message, depending on the rights that they have. And of course, for named users like an auditor or a legal team, you'll be able to go back and see when a message was viewed, what was searched, if a message was deleted by chance, or litigation holds. There's many things that you'll be able to go back and see to be able to have an audit of what has been happening. And what's great, once again, and I want to hit on this again, is that the administrator has the ability to create different roles within the archive solution. And those roles will now free up IT's time so that they can go on and do the things that they need to be doing without being, constantly bombarded with requests for restoring an email, searching mobile messages. You can get that to the appropriate team. And then, of course, you have that oversight. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention is that everything that's done within the archive is done with policy-based archiving, meaning that you can state policies to determine how long a message is stored for, when a message is archived. If it's older than, let's say, 30 days, it will be archived, and then how long it stays on the archive. And then you can configure when an archived message is to be deleted. So what's great is that by being able to set up these policies and set up this deletion management, when it reaches the parameters that you set, that message is taken off of the archive. This allows you to manage the size of your archive. It allows you to make sure that you're fulfilling your policies and your industry standards to the T. So if your industry standard says that you archive something for 7 years, once that message hits that or passes that 7 years, it's dropped off the archive, and now you don't have to worry about that. And of course, with litigation holds, you can and within the deletion manager, you can ensure that litigation hold messages are not deleted, depending on your policy once again. And I talked a little bit about, and I showed you the litigation hold per message. Here's an example of the litigation hold per user. So these litigation holds can be applied to the entire mailbox if needs be, and it can also be, as I stated, as a per message as well, and a global level as well. Here's an example of the litigation hold there. So kind of to touch back on the reasons here, we're going to talk once again about compliance. So we know that your EMM with BES is all about security, making sure, and of course with BVM protected, making sure that your messages are secure, that they're encrypted, that your organization is protected. And we know that your employees want to use mobile devices. And the EMM provides you with that security. And BAS makes sure that you're compliant. Make sure that you're compliant with those regulations and you have that search, auditing, publishing, and e-discovery tools to make sure that you're compliant. And so to finish up and to summarize, we're going to have some time for questions, so that's great. We do have a little bit of time here. So, and make sure, I'm just going to put a plug, as Carrie said, make sure to put your questions through. If you do have any, put them through in the chat or the chat there, and we'll make sure to address them here now that we're getting toward the end. So, but just to finish up, with BAS, you can securely archive your BVM, PIN, SMS, and phone call logs for Blackberry devices, as well as text messages and phone call logs for Android and iOS. And of course, you've got the ability to archive other electronic communication, including email and social media. So that, once again, you have that unified archive of all your electronic communications in one central location. You can quickly search and perform e-discovery of that. You can have that publishing ability. You have that audit logs. And, of course, you have that end-user access for those users to go back, search their own archive, and be able to access their archive messages if needs be. So the idea here is, once again, to come back to the reason why we're here is why should you be archiving? And the idea here is, once again, is to manage your electronic communication and to comply with regulations. And so one final thing to make mention of is that with BAS, you can choose which pieces that you archive. If you want to archive your mobile communication today and social media tomorrow, you can implement the mobile communication archiving today and implement the different pieces as you go down the road. So that, once again, we give you that flexibility to be able to implement different pieces, and you have that central archive of all your electronic communication. So we're going to go ahead and go into the Q&A portion. I'm going to give some time over to James. He is going to see if there's some questions, and he'll field those, and we'll make sure that we get you some answers here. James, let me turn the time over to you.
Perfect, thanks. I'll just do a quick introduction here. James Wang from Blackberry, Senior Business Development Manager, and I'll be hosting the Q&A session here. And of course, if there are any Blackberry-specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those as well. Just a quick reminder for anyone on the webinar that we do have the chat window available. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask them through the chat window. And with that, we have had some questions starting to flow in. So, Q, let me get these ready for you, and we'll take those. And if anyone else has other questions, we'll handle those as well.
Great.
So, Q, the first one that has come in has been asking about multiple devices. What happens if a user has multiple devices? How would we archive against that?
Great. Good question. So, yes, multiple devices, as we know, many people have multiple devices. I would imagine that most people on this call probably have a Blackberry or similar mobile device, and they probably have something else, like a tablet. So the idea here is that with archiving, it does not matter how many devices a user has. This is the Blackberry Audit and Archive service is per user, and it's tied to the user. So, and it's deployed per user. So if a user has multiple phones, let's say they have multiple phones, one a corporate issued and one that they're bringing their own, and maybe those mobile messages would be able to be archived. no matter how many devices they have, and it would tie back to the user. So a user would be able to go through and browse their own archive and view their messages per phone. And then, of course, the auditor would be able to go back and view all messages from all those mobile devices tied to each user.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question that we have rolling in is about deletion. So what happens if a user deletes their mobile messages? Will those be archived?
Perfect. So that is a concern. Yes, that is something that obviously is one of the reasons why you should be archiving, is that if a user communicates something and then they go back and delete it, without an archive, without Blackberry Auditing and Archiving service, you'd never be able to see it, right? Because it's gone, it's taken away. However, with Blackberry in particular, because it goes through the Blackberry Enterprise system, those messages are archived and taken into the system, even if they're deleted. So that does not matter. It's still archived. And the same goes for Android and iOS messages. Those are all archived via those apps, and even if a user deletes that message, it's still going to be pulled into the archive. And the same goes for email and social media. If that's something that's essential to compliance, so that if a message is ever deleted off the live system, it'll be sure to be in the archive.
Perfect. Thanks. Another question here. What sort of regulations could affect what and how my organization archives?
Good. And I touched a little bit on that, but I didn't hit directly all the different regulations. So let me just touch on a few of them, and I'd encourage you that those of you who are in a regulated industry such as healthcare, financial, or government, to go out and do a little bit of searching to make sure that you understand all the regulations. Just as a summary, I will touch on each one of them, but as a summary, most regulations state that you need to be archiving electronic communication, and that you need to be able to quickly and easily access those archived communications. So some that apply, let's just talk healthcare for a minute. Healthcare specifically, there's HIPAA and there's high tech. And both of these regulations really touch on not sharing personal health information, sensitive information. So as your employees are communicating, they should not be communicating personal health information. And so the idea with HIPAA and high tech when it comes to electronic communication is you need to have an archive so that you can go back and show that kind of personal health information was not shared. Then when it comes to financial, you have FINRA regulations. There is the Dodd-Frank Act. I talked about that a little bit. And there's Sarbanes-Oxley. And Dodd-Frank Act is interesting, as I talked a little bit before, is it really hits hard on mobile communication, right? That you need to be able to, it's all electronic communication, but especially mobile communication needs to be accessible. And it needs to, if you're ever involved in an audit, you have 72 hours to produce those messages that are involved in an audit. So, and then FINRA also talks about that you have guidelines on how long you should be archiving. And if I'm not mistaken, it's about 7 years for that one. And then for government, especially for federal government, you have the NARA, which is the National Archives. And basically they have outlined that all government agencies need to be archiving all electronic communication. And we've seen with recent things, especially in the United States, with some federal employees and federal institutions who have not been archiving, and kind of the problems that creates. And so that's why those mandates have come down to ensure that everyone in federal and state and local government is archiving. And then, of course, you have the Freedom of Information Act, which that one, once again, if someone requests information from a public entity, that they have to produce that information and make that public. And so once again, that's where you need to be able to have an archive that can be searched and quickly and easily accessed. So that's a brief overview of a few of the regulations. Like I said, there's others as well that are out there, and I encourage you to familiarize yourself with them and, once again, ensure that you're compliant with them.
Perfect. Thanks, Hugh. I think that's it for our questions today. So with that, I'll pass it over to Carrie to wrap it up.
Thanks, James. So the last slide here that we have for today's webinar are the contacts in case you should need more information on the BAS solution or any information that was presented in today's webinar. So feel free to reach out to your Blackberry sales account manager, or Q's contact information is here as well, and we'd be happy to help you with more information. And I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for joining today's webinar, Why Enterprises Need Mobile Communication, Auditing, and Archiving, and we'll make today's webinar available on demand for your review. Thanks for your time.